Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rock Live. My name is Craig McNeil with Accenture, where I lead our North America Industry X.0 business. In Industry X.0, we help companies build intelligent products and platforms, as well as digitally transform their manufacturing and operations. And today, I'm going to talk about developing a digitized agile supply chain, and of course, the benefits that come from that. Now, I actually wanted to start our conversation here talking about a comedy club in Barcelona, of all things. Now, this comedy club did something very unique. They installed optical sensors that could determine facial patterns. So instead of charging $35 per ticket, they charged 30 cents per laugh. So think about what this accomplishes. It's completely outcome-based for the customer. They literally pay for comedy. Not for attempted comedy, but only when they find the comedian funny. Now, second, and perhaps most importantly, the comedian gets feedback on what jokes work and what jokes didn't work, completely closing the feedback loop. Now, comedians have always been able to get a closed feedback in terms of laughter. They can understand whether something was funny just by judging the crowd. That is true. However, this system enables them to see smiles, frowns, understand when the audience is offended, and helping them build a better routine for the future. So you may be asking, what does this have in common with a digitized agile supply chain? Well, the sensors, the data, and the compute power then informs the comedian and also creates the outcome-based situation for the customer are all used to build a resilient supply chain that is in line with the outcome economy. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's session. So, what if you could protect your supply chain from global disruptive forces and increase production and optimize yield in near real time? So, developing a digitized agile supply chain could make this possible. So we're going to consider a couple examples, and I'm going to advance the slide here, and we're going to talk about Jim. So I want to do a compare and contrast of Jim, who's an EVP of manufacturing for an apple juice maker, and I want to compare a day in the life of Jim today, and let's call that the non-agile world, to a day in the life of Jim in the future, in the agile world. So if we consider Jim today, he goes into the office. Let's consider this the first Monday of the month, where Jim attends a monthly CEO meeting. And in this CEO meeting, the marketing and sales team have a proposal that would expand the US market. And that in turn requires Jim to answer the question of the CEO of, can you expand production to be in line with this sales and marketing campaign? And Jim would have to expand by 40%. So Jim has 5 factories in the US making apple juice today. He knows they're not at full capacity, so he's confident that he'll be able to find a way to do this, maybe by adding more shifts to accomplish the increased production, but he's less comfortable with his supplier diversity. He's got a few bottlenecks in machines, and his ability to source and train labor to add the additional capacity is a bit worrisome to him as well. So he starts making phone calls to understand his supplier options, the health of his factory, and his future labor. So let's break this down. From a supplier perspective, he only has 2 suppliers. He makes a phone call to them. They say they're maxed out, but they give him some recommendations from other suppliers. Doesn't give him a warm and fuzzy that he's going to be able to answer the CEO's question. Now let's look at the factory. 2 of his 5 factories have been having mill issues, a piece of equipment that is used in apple juice manufacturing. Those issues have been disrupting production for the last 2 months. So another chink in the armor in terms of being able to provide that level of confidence. And then one of the 5 factories had a bacteria problem recently. So now let's look at labor. So 2 of his 5 factories have had labor issues due to COVID, where they've had to do fewer shifts and have less people at the location. So all of this is adding up to Jim having spent about 8 hours during the day making phone calls, trying to assess whether this would be possible. And at the end of the day, when he's supposed to report back to the CEO, he doesn't have the ability to answer the question. So now let's compare that with the Agile Day. And now in this scenario, let's talk about this in full Agile functionality. So now this monthly CEO meeting has actually turned into a daily stand-up, taking a page out of the book of Agile Methodology Project Management. So Jim attends a 15-minute stand-up with the CEO as well as the rest of the executive team every day. And in this case, Jim is not asked whether he can increase production, but he is told to increase production. It's already assumed that he can do that. They just need to understand how and what the time is going to take. So Jim knows just in this situation as the last one, he's going to have to increase production by 40%. In this situation, he doesn't start making phone calls to see if he can increase production. Rather, he starts by initiating a request of his systems for the most efficient way to increase by 40%. And through this, he learns that one of his suppliers is going to be down next week. So the system compensates for that, sorts out the impact that this event will have to the request to increase production. And overall, the report comes back with the most efficient way to increase production by 40%. The report says he's going to have to replace the mill that was in factory 2. Remember that there were 2 mills that were causing issues. It's requesting or suggesting that we replace at least one of those. It also says that you could staff up another 75 people across 3 different factories to add that additional shift, and that would get you to 40%. And further, the report says all of this can be accomplished within 30 days. So Jim puts the plan into action, reports back to the executive team, and all of this takes about 2.5 hours. So let's consider the differences here. Let's take an inventory of what's different with his suppliers, factory, and labor in this scenario compared to the first scenario. In the Agile scenario, his suppliers' systems forecast based on weather and growing events their monthly yield, and surpluses and deficit amounts are forecasted and communicated to Jim's production systems. So they have more data to consume about future actions. And it's not just his existing suppliers. Alternative suppliers are also contracted with minimum and maximum commitments, and it's all integrated into Jim's systems. So when Jim runs the optimization report, it's considering all of this data, all of these variables. Additionally, inside the factory, sensors are embedded into all the factory machinery: temperature, vibration, pressure, location, and others depending on the specific type of machinery. In addition to the machinery, there's supporting equipment in the factory, and sensors are added to that as well. Things like sterilization equipment, hand washing stations, doors, motion sensors in rooms and hallways, etc. All of those things enable the factory to do things that make it more efficient. For example, connected thermometers to take employee temperature when they get to factory ingress points. Now, in food manufacturing, that has been done for some time because the things that the world has experienced with COVID recently don't pop up every day in a food manufacturing facility, but they have to be more concerned with the health of their employees. So while that probably happened before, you can imagine this is going to be happening in factories worldwide, depending on, or regardless of what is actually manufactured. Another thing that is done here in the factories is keeping people healthy by simple things like ensuring that they wash their hands a certain number of times per day, per shift. And that can be determined with sensors, on people, at the hand washing stations, etc. And those are good things to keep the staff healthy, not just for the good of the product, but just as well as keeping the throughput and keeping the factory working. And then specifically getting into the labor, the factory workers are all connected via an employee application. They do self-reporting on temperature and health questionnaires at home at the end of each day. All of those things compile a ton of data on the labor pool. And then if you consider the 75 people that are going to have to come online and be onboarded, they have video training that's ready to go to help onboard the new workers. And they have virtual reality, instruction training that helps get the new workers oriented. And then they have augmented reality that actually helps them do training on the job and take instructions on the job so that they're productive within that 30-day period. Now, all of this doesn't just magically happen, of course, and I'm not going to get overly technical, but I will give you a quick insight into what has to happen from a technical perspective here. Now, the reality is we've talked a lot about sensors. We've talked about data that comes off of those sensors, and there's always a perception that just goes into the cloud, and a lot of it does. But the types of real-time decisions that have to be made, in the factory, on the factory floor, even with the suppliers, and sometimes in the logistics, don't have the luxury of going all the way up to the cloud to make those decisions and coming back. A lot of the stuff has to be determined at the sensor level. Can't go outside of the actual device. Some of it can go outside of the device or outside of the sensor, but has to stay within the premise. And some of it can go into the cloud. And so we really look at that as 4 layers of connectivity to really set up the best, digitized agile supply chain. Now, I've given you a compare and contrast of Jim's situation pre-agile and after implementing a digitized agile supply chain. But there's many other ways that the benefit can be realized from a digitized agile supply chain. So I'm going to give you 4 more of those, and I'll quickly run through this. But on the upper right, we've got this scenario. So what if, let's start with the upper left. What if you get a notification of a workforce disruption due to COVID? It's been happening a lot lately. Using past, present, and predictive future insights, your system autonomously provides suggested countermeasures for your entire supply chain. Huge benefit to an agile supply chain. Upper right, what if running analytics on suppliers and factories helps identify which suppliers and factories directly correlate to the best quality and yield, and then autonomously communicates to the entire supply chain and adjusts so that your end user is not impacted by low quality or yield. Another huge benefit. And then bottom left, what if your system notifies that the demand is about to surge in a specific part of LA? And then best yet, it gives you 3 options on how to address it. Huge benefit there. And then the last one, and I'm purposely going to end with a fun one. What if visibility into the supply chain brings life to your product? What do I mean by that? So the journey, the visibility of the journey brings trust and loyalty to your customer. In this situation, meet Lola and her chicks. Your product now has a personality and a name. So let's come to the final question here. What could you do to your supply chain? Now, I've given you lots of examples. The apple juice example, going probably fairly in depth into what one of those transformations looks like. But I will tell you, as I experience this every day with my customers, even the smallest change, the smallest transformation in the supply chain has massive benefits to it. So I really hope you guys get out there and do it. You won't be disappointed. Thanks, and I'm going to stand by for Q&A.